How's everybody doing today? So today I brought you blue-white control. I'm a sucker for blue-white control. Just something about it. It's my favorite type of deck to play. Basically, you just sit back on all instant speed, counter everything your opponent does, stick a threat, win the game. Like that's just my type of deck to play. Go to turns, basically. Well, not turns, but go to time and make sure you always win. This list is basically traditional blue-white. It has some cutesy things in here. That we're going to go over here. Before I get into this, if you don't want to listen to me go over the deck, down below I'll have the link to the deck list, and then also down there I will have timestamps for each match that we play, along with the deck we played. So if you just want to skip through all this, by all means go for it. I'll be up front. We went 3-2 in this league. In the first two matchups, we lost. I'm going to put those at the end just for YouTube so you don't got to see it. But we went 3-2. First two matchups just felt rough. They just, I recorded this about 5 days ago before is Flage, basically. Flage was just wrecking me. Our draws were terrible. And then going into round three, match one, we just got bodied again. I mean, it was awful. I thought for sure we were going to end up going 0-5 and 0-5. And it was terrible. Anyway, we pulled it out. We got a 3-2. We stabilized, recovered. So anyway, just want to give you a heads up. Also wanted to give you a heads up since I did go 0-2 to start and then got bodied in game one of match three. I am a little tilted when I'm playing here, so some of these plays are going to be a little loosey-goosey, so you'll have to bear with me. We'll talk through them here as I play. So there's going to be some misplays here. I'm not perfect. A couple misclicks. It's the other problem with this deck, as you'll see, we're really threat light. Our only real win cons here are Solitudes and a Hall of the Storm Giant. If that doesn't work, you do have a Kihira that you have as a companion. But if that doesn't work, you're down to Teferis. Teferi, Hero Dominaria, can pop all your opponent's permanents and then can tuck himself infinitely with his -3 ability, and then your opponent eventually decks with no permanents. We didn't have anything like that happen, but we did get close to time playing against like mono blue Beltcher and things like that. So if you see me trying to frankly play quickly, one, I'm tilted, and two, I am not the fastest moto player. And playing blue-white control, you have to watch your time because you will time out, and opponents will use that against you, unfortunately, on Magic Online. Again, not that blue-white, not that you should slow roll your opponent or anything like that. It's just the client, I'm not super fluent with it, so you'll have to bear with me. You won't have to see me slow play too much as we're going to just watch replays, so it'll move through real quickly. Anyway, getting into the list here, we have 21 lands. Is a little light for a control deck. With that said, our curve does stop at 5 with Teferi, Hero Dominaria, and we are playing 2 Lorien Revealeds, which are pseudo lands, and we have some cards that cycle, like Tune of the Narrative, do cycle to hopefully get you to a land. We are playing 2 Archive, so we can surveil to hopefully find a land if that's what we're looking for. As you see, we're playing a very small energy package here, only 3 Tuna Narratives, so we can play Wrath of Disguise. So anyway, getting into the spells here, we have 2 Spell Snare, 3 Tuna Narratives for our 1-drops. For our 2-drops, we have 2 Dress Down for a Counterspell. Pretty generic. Dress Down is not bad in some matchups. Some matchups it's not great. It is really good against constructs, obviously, for your opponent if they have Urza Saga. Getting into our 3-drops, we have 2 really cutesy cards to start with. Brain Surge is one. Card felt all right. I think we cast it like 2 or 3 times, not very often. When we did cast it, it did feel great. And then my one of my favorite cards here, Days Undoing. This is in here because we're playing Narset. And obviously, the dream here is to go Narset into Days Undoing. If you don't know, Days Undoing says you shuffle your hand and graveyard and deck together, and you draw 7 cards. You and your opponent both do it, and it ends the turn. Well, if you have Narset in play, your opponent draws 1 card. You get to draw 7, and hopefully the game ends there, as long as you have the board state under control. The super awesome play that everyone dreams of is in here. We didn't get to do it. That is Narset with Days Undoing. And then you use Gyro Reach Sanitarium. Basically how it works, if you don't know, you go Narset, you do Days Undoing, so your opponent has 1 card in hand, The turn ends, goes over to them, and you activate Gyro Reach Sanitarium. It says each player draws one card, then discards one card. How that works with Narset is you do it in your opponent's draw step, so your opponent draws one card for the turn. You activate Gyro Reach Sanitarium. They can't draw another card, but they still have to discard a card. So they have to pitch the card that they just drew, and they don't get to draw a card. So your opponent is basically locked out the game unless they can play something at instant speed. It's really cute. Never got to do it, but when you do it, it's awesome, obviously. So anyway, three Narsets, 3 Force Negations, 1 Teferi Time Raveler. I didn't know how I felt about Teferi here. It actually felt good. I know it dies to energy. I think it's Galvanic Blast. Obviously, I think that's actually even wrong. But anyway, it can be killed very easily in this format. Also, things like energy can just run you down, kill it, and not care about Teferi. But we did play things like Mono Blue Beltcher. It did come up, felt great. At our 4 drops, we had 2 Memory Deluge, 1 Supreme Verdict. Memory Deluge felt pretty good. The only downside is we play Rest in Peace, so it's kind of hit or miss there. Supreme Verdict is for like your Eldrazi decks, where Wrath of the Skies is great. You want a sweeper. 4 Solitudes, as I stated. It's really our only real win con between 4 Solitudes and 1 Hall of the Storm Giants. And we do have Kikira as a companion. But outside of that, that's all the threats that you have. So yeah, Solitude's obviously great. Flash, Lifelink, XL, Permanents, perfect. And then we have 2 Lorien Revealed, 2 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Love this card. This card's great. Draws cards, untaps lands, tucks problematic permanents. Its ultimate basically wins you the game with given enough time. Moving on, we have 4 prismatic endings. We are playing 1 breeding pool in our blue-white list. So we can do X's 3 with the prismatic endings, and then 4 Wrath of the Skies. Moving on to our sideboard here. We have 1 Orange Champ. Super weird. Brought in once or twice. It's a weird card, right? So basically you can keep your opponent from countering your stuff, stop your opponent from doing anything too crazy, and obviously it can prevent combat damage. You can bring it against Beltcher, stuff like that. If they go to sack their Lotus Bloom to get 3 mana, you can respond with Orim's Chant, so that way they can't play their Beltcher. They had to fight over an Orim's Chant, which they probably don't really want to counterspell, but yet if they don't, they'll waste 3 mana, stuff like that. We have 2 Celestial Purges for all the green and black and red decks. 2 Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace just felt so slow. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. It didn't feel great. You think this is like the premier graveyard hate, and it just, everybody sideboards for enchantment artifact removal, and it hits your own Memory Deluges, and the matches I need in against Flage just never saw it. I know Surgical Extraction is a debated topic between a lot of people, because technically card disadvantage, but if we had Surgical here and we had Surgical Flages, we probably would have won 5-0. I'm not saying Surgical is the answer. You definitely want some type of other graveyard hate along with Surgical, but I could see it. If you could fit it, Surgical might be great. We have 4 Consigned Memories. This card is just phenomenal. The replicate part of it is just, it's wild. Like, you need 4 of this in blue-white. Any blue deck, you should probably be running 4 Consigns. Card is just completely busted. We have 2 Mystical Disputes. We're expecting to play some blue decks, Splitter Twin, blue, anything. It's just great. We have 1 extra Supreme Verdict. Again, like I said, Eldrazi, Tron, stuff like that. Eldrazi packages helps us clean up the board. We have our Kikira, who's our companion, since we're only playing elementals. This card does come up a good bit, actually. I forgot how broken they can feel as a companion, just having that free card you can get, and not to mention that obviously it's a 3/2 with Vigilance, and then gives +1/+1 Vigilance to our Solitudes is just phenomenal. Doesn't come up a ton, but like it is solid. And then we have 2 Damping Spears. Didn't bring it in at all. I assume it's good against Eldrazi type stuff, and then anything is trying to do like storm type things. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get into the leagues. I do want to be up front and let you know, I think I said earlier at the beginning, that I was a little tilted at the beginning, as you're going to see here, so forgive some misplays. I'll do better in the next one. All right, let's get into the games. All right, we're here for match 1, game 1. We go ahead and keep this hand. We have land, spells, counterspell, dress down, and Narset to give us some card advantage. Opponent plays Air to Mesa, passes. We play Breeding Pool and pass. Our opponent surveils, puts a Blood Crypt into the graveyard. And then they do the play I did not want to see. They go Stomping Ground into a Wrenn and 6. So they will have plenty of lands going forward. At this point, with a resolved Wrenn and 6, we don't have many options, right? The only way we can remove a resolved Wrenn and 6 is with Prismatic Ending, which we obviously don't have in hand. So our opponent's going to get lots of value off this Wrenn and 6. So I do a little bit of pass going here. So our opponent goes Faithless Looting. I don't know what else they're going to do, so Faithless Looting isn't super terrifying by itself, so I don't counter it, I let it go. Our opponent does go Thoughtseize here, though, and I do counterspell. The reason I go ahead and counterspell here is that our opponent's Thoughtseize resolves. Chances are they're going to take the counterspell. Because I'm assuming at this point they're going to persist this Archon, and if they don't do that, they're obviously on Creativity, and they could probably do Creativity, as soon as next turn, and I don't want them to know that my hand's all bricks and that they could resolve an Archon. Obviously, we have Dress Down to prevent the Archon's ability, but trying to answer a resolved Archon with our current board state, our hand is awful. We have no white card to pitch to Solitude, much less a Solitude, so I just don't want to give them the information, and since they're probably going to take Counterspell, I'm just going to go ahead and counter their Thoughtseize a while. So we do draw a Prismatic Ending, which is nice. So we can finally answer this Wrenn and 6. I'm still terrified of them doing some crazy stuff here with Archons, so I pass, holding up Dress Down. Our opponent goes a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Not super great for us. Our hand's pretty bricked up here. Dress Down doesn't do a whole lot here. So we go get an Archive so we can surveil. I cycle this Dress Down to try and find something. We do find a Solitude, which is pretty good. We go Archive, find another land. We're starting to kind of flood out here. I go ahead here in Narset. I was really hoping to find a Force Negation. Unfortunately, we only find a Supreme Verdict, which is okay. It helps clean up Archons, but if they go like double Archon, we had to pitch 2, they draw 2. We're just so far behind, even with a Supreme Verdict. I don't think we would get there. Our opponent, I think, makes a punt here. Yeah, our opponent, I think, is new to Creativity, because so what they do here is that they mess up here. I kind of pump back. I'll go over the whole interaction here. So they go Creativity on their Dwarf token. Creativity, you can sacrifice artifacts. They should have sacrificed their Treasure token. If they sacrifice their Treasure token, Creativity 100% hits an Archon. But since they do it on the token, I happen to have Solitude, so I invoke a Solitude to kill the Dwarf to fizzle the Creativity. It is worth noting I did exile our Prismatic Ending to the Solitude. I was still fearing, since they just jammed this, I was still fearing a Persist or a follow-up Creativity, since they did filter some draws with this Fable. So I was fearing Archons next turn, where Supreme Verdict answers Archons, Prismatic Ending doesn't. But anyway, we'll get there later on dealing with this Wrenn and 6. So like I said, we go ahead and evoke the Solitude, exile their Dwarf, Creativity fizzles. As I said, that was a misplay on their part. We draw, and at this part, we are just flooding. So you see a Wrath of the Skies, that's not what we're looking for. I go ahead and cycle a Dress Down. We're just looking for anything at this point, and I'll be honest with you, I was about to concede this match. As we didn't see a single Prismatic Ending. Obviously, we pitched one. We cycled the Dress Down to look for a Prismatic Ending to answer this Wrenn and 6. This Wrenn and 6 is about to ultimate. They ultimate this and just can keep flashing back Creativity. The game ends. I was literally hovering. You can't see it here, but I was literally about to concede the game. But for some reason, as you're going to see here, our opponent keeps plussing the Wrenn and 6. I assume maybe they didn't have another one, thought it was safe, and just wanted to keep getting that value. But as you see here, we do get to punish them a little bit. Opponent plays another Fable. At this point, we're falling super behind. Wrath of the Skies is great here. Will help us clean up some stuff. But my biggest issue right now is Wrenn and 6. So we go main phase Memory Deluge find a prismatic ending, and get the Ren 6 out of here. Still not looking great here. Hopefully we can untap with Wrath of the Skies and try and get back into this. With that said, it's not looking too great for us. So our opponent hits the persist. Like I said, not looking great for the home team here. They go ahead and copy their Archon. We pitch a Wrath of the Skies. And then they swing. And at this point, we have a choice between Wrath of the Skies and Supreme Verdict. We obviously have to keep the Supreme Verdict as it wipes everything. So, definitely rough for us. And then, as you see, math is for blockers. I had no blockers, so we lost. We ended up at exactly 0. Nothing else I could have did there. So, hopefully we can do a little better here in games 2 and 3. All right, here we are for match 1, game 2 against Creativity. So here's the sideboard real quick. So as you can see, I cut 2 Wrath of the Skies for 2 Rests in Peace. Wrath of the Skies isn't bad in this matchup, but it doesn't answer Archons. We also brought in a Supreme Verdict, as Supreme Verdict obviously helps wrath the board of Archons and anything. We also brought in 2 Celestial Purge, as it pretty much hits everything our opponent's trying to do. We cut 2 Spell Snare, 1 Tuna Narrative, and 2 Wrath of the Skies. So let's go ahead here and get into this game. This one's pretty rough for us. I'm pretty sure we mulligan to 5. It starts to go here. Sorry about that. So, all right. So here we are. So like I said, we mulligan to 5 here. Our hand's not great. Our opponent mulligan to 6. This hand's pretty terrible. But I do keep the Force Negation, as we do have a Memory Deluge. Not that we want to pitch Force Negation, but we do have a Force as a counterspell. We have Supreme Verdict as a Wrath to catch up, and a Memory Deluge if we get the 4 lands to hopefully pull us out of this mulligan. Our lands are kind of crappy. We would have liked to fetch land, but we have Otawara and Mystic Gate, so we do have access to double blue and double white. So just go Otawara pass. All the cards in our hand are uncastable. Our opponent goes turn 1, and they Thoughtseize us. Obviously, I'm not going to force a Thoughtseize, so I let it go. We draw another Force Negation. Now, our opponent goes Faithless Looting. Our opponent didn't play a land first. So they go Faithless Looting, and our situation is terrible here, right? So I go ahead and I force this Faithless Looting. The reason I do that is if our opponent has a good hand, we mold the 5, and with the hand that you see here, there's no way we're winning, right? Like if our opponent has any type of reasonable playable hand, we are not winning. So my only thought here is our only hope is our opponent's stuck on a 1-land hand. Faithless Looting is the only way they can find another land, and so we need to force this and just hope their hand's worse than ours. And somehow that I thought it was going to work. They do have another land, and they surveil a Veil of Summer into the graveyard, which is horrifying. Veil of Summer is just such a great card. And anyway, it turns and looks like our opponent just has a bunch of lands. So unlike us, who's missing lands, our opponent has all lands. So there's a lot of pass go here. We do finally hit Polluted Delta, which is nice, so we can hopefully surveil here. Find something of meaning. Our opponent is obviously on a terrible draw. Our opponent finally ran out of lands. We find a Brain Surge. I keep it just because it's castable. I was afraid we would whiff if I binned it. So here we Celestial Purge away our opponent's Dwarf token so they can't cast their Creativity. Our opponent passes. We Memory Deluge, find a land, and a Solitude. So we're starting to get there. Our opponent is now at 4 cards in hand. They're obviously flooding. Our opponent once again goes for creativity. We brain surge looking for another white spell. We end up evoking a Solitude, pitching a Prismatic Ending, and answering their token to counter their creativity. At this point, we're starting to feel okay. We need to fade a couple more turns here. Our opponent casts a Thoughtseize. We let him take the Memory Deluge. Hopefully we can flash it back here this turn, actually. The only problem here is our opponent starts hard casting Archons, which is kind of horrifying. Obviously, we pitched a Prismatic Ending, and then we Solitude their Archon. For some reason here, I don't know why this was evoked. I apologize. This was obviously, it depends how you look at a misplay, but I also really wanted to flash back our Memory Deluge here. So I did pitch 2 cards. We could have let this all resolve and had a Solitude in play at the end. But as you're going to see here, I did want to flash back the Memory Deluge. So I think us getting to look at 7 cards. So as you see here, we get the Teferi with a counterspell, and hopefully it should be good enough to lock up the game here. So at this point, our opponent's pretty behind. They try and hardcast in yet another Archon. So now we know what was in their hand. We obviously had the counterspell. It is worth noting that we do need another counterspell here. We also still have that Memory Deluge in the yard that we can use if needed. I apologize. This is taking a second to move along here. I don't know if I was thinking of flashing back the Memory Deluge now or not. Technically, we could flash back Memory Deluge for 7 and then Teferi's untap. We still would have had 3 mana open, which might have been the correct play, but I don't do that here. Our opponent goes Persist, which is horrifying for us, so we go ahead and flash back to Memory Deluge. Like I said, it would have been better for us to have done this probably on our main phase, and then we could have untapped 2 lands. We would have had 3 mana here. So unfortunately, the Archon really messes us up. We lose our Teferi, we lose a card, we lose the life, and our opponent gets to draw a card. I don't invoke our Solitude, obviously, as we want to hard cast it here. So let's go ahead here and answer all our opponent's permanents. So I go ahead and get the Solitude as I wanted to get rid of the Archon permanently. I play the Rest in Peace, which is all right. I was trying to see if we had any more Memory Deluges in the yard. We do not. So anyway, we get rid of the token. So there, any draw of creativity is worse. We exile the Archon and then the Rest in Peace. Our hand is not amazing, but if we can ride this Solitude to victory, maybe we can get there. Our opponent is at 26, so this is a super slow clock. With that said, we obviously have Kahira yet, so Kahira can come down and help speed up our clock. Looks like our opponent has yet another Archon. I think for our opponent that'd make, what, 3 Archons, so we know what was in their hand. Our opponent had a bunch of lands, but all the Archons in hand. So sure enough, there's the Archon. We're now at 7. We can answer it. Our opponent has 3 cards in hand. We go ahead here in Supreme Verdict, and then we play the Narset. And we do get a counterspell. Unfortunately, we can't leave it up this turn. Our opponent has the Thoughtseize to take it. And then our opponent gets a red and 6 going. They go ahead here and ping our Narset down to 2, I'm sorry. So we go ahead and cash her in for a Force of Negation. I buy our Kakira. And I pass as if we had cast it, we couldn't hold up Force of Negation. And in turn, we go ahead and Celestial Purge away their red and 6. Go ahead and play our Kakira. Kakira has a long way to go. Our opponent's life is at 27. Our opponent's still flooding somewhat. They have 3 cards to our 2. I don't feel too terrible here, but with our clock being, what is that, an 8-turn clock or something like that, I'm not feeling too great. We do hit the Teferi here, which is great. It means any Veil of Summers in the future that we saw earlier shouldn't be as great. So we go ahead, play Teferi. Our opponent punts here again. They go ahead and get a Dwarf token, which is a punt, because we just obviously get to bounce it here with our Teferi, and then we do hit the Hall of the Storm Giants, which is great, really helps increase our clock. After they see that our opponent concedes, I think is a little early of a concession, but like I said, we wore through 3 Archons. Through three Archons and 3 Creativities, and they were out of Dwarven Mines. So that I assume maybe they had another one in hand, misplayed it, and punted. Anyway, I'll be back here for game 3. Alright, here we are, match 1, game 3. This is for all the marbles. Again, we have Kakira. Opening hand is questionable. We have 1 land, but we do have Tune the Narrative and a draw step. We are waiting for our opponent to decide if they are mulliganing or keeping here. It is worth noting we are slightly ahead on clock here. Our opponent is about 12.5 minutes. We're at like 12:50. So we're doing okay on time here. All right. So our opponent goes ahead and mulligans. We also mulligan into an abysmal hand. At least we have a bunch of lands in an archive. We do have Rest in Peace and a Supreme Verdict. We draw into a Prismatic Ending, so our hand is super reactive. Well, I'd love to have something like a counterspell or something here. So we go ahead here and Surveil. See yet another land that we don't need, and we put that into the bin. Draw another Prismatic Ending. At this point, we just go ahead and jam the Rest in Peace. I have nothing. We don't have anything else going on. Our opponent goes ahead and Thoughtseize us, taking our Supreme Verdict. And at this point, we now have 3 Prismatic Endings. As you saw, we surveilled, saw a Force Negation. We keep that on top. We draw a Force, play our tapped Hollowed Fountain. Unfortunately, we're going to get in a very odd holding pattern here. Since we drew another Force, we are able to add a Kakira to hand. We had not drawn another blue card to pitch to that Force. I probably would have added the Kakira to hand. At this point, I decided to put the shields down here. We play the Kakira, play our land, and we just need to get a clock into play. We just can't sit around all day. Our hand's pretty weak. So anyway, go ahead and start shoving with the Kakira here. And again, I just decide we need to put pressure. So we go ahead, play our Teferi, and plus, hoping to hit a counterspell. We don't. Find a Force of Negation. We also don't have another blue card, sorry. So anyway, at this point, I'm starting to feel okay about our spot here. We have double Force Spell Snare and a Teferi going with a Kakira. Our opponent Besages are our rest in peace here. End of turn, I go ahead and get the breeding pool just in case we need the green source for prismatic ending for 3 on any possible Fable the Mirror Breakers. Our opponent is at 7, so they have about, what, 3 turns. Opponent's deep in the tank here. Like I said, I'm feeling pretty good here. We had double force negation up. Looks like our opponent's going to go for it here. We really need them not to have Veil. Even if they did, obviously, we could force it. That's exactly what our opponent has. And then that was enough for our opponent. I think it was a slightly early concession. They could have took one more draw step, but they decided to pack it in there. Again, our opponent didn't play the best. We didn't play the best. We did mulligan to 5, and then managed to pull that one out. And this one we mulliganed. I managed to pull it out. So on to round 2. Right, here we are for round 2, game 1. Hand's not phenomenal, but we go ahead and keep here. We have Supreme Verdict, Dress Down, and Teferi. Obviously, we have a fetch land, so we can go ahead here and surveil one. We find another land. Looks like our opponent is on some type of, I want to say, energy package. I don't go ahead here and I don't use the Dress Down, as I assume Supreme Verdict will be able to clean up all this stuff. It's one thing I tend to do, use your life as a resource. For Ranger Captain here, we go ahead and Dress Down so they can't go ahead and search. Unfortunately, we draw a Force of Negation, which is completely dead in this matchup. End of turn, we're going to go ahead here and surveil again. We find a land. We don't really need a land. Our opponent sacks their Ranger Captain, so we can't cast any spells here. So since I can't cast anything, I go ahead and add the Kakira to our hand. Our opponent, I think, in this game rips 3 Captain Rangers in a row, and they basically keep us from casting anything. Yeah, here's the second one, and our opponent basically beats us down. We have a Supreme Verdict in our hand, and we never get to cast it. As you'll see here, we just get beat down here. This was a really rough game for us. Like I said, if we had a Solitude or something, we might have had a chance. But if you ever want to see energy do their thing, this is energy doing their thing. There's not a whole lot I'm going to be able to comment here, as our opponent obviously sacks their Ranger Captain. In our upkeep, we can't cast anything. I'm going to spoil it. We don't draw a Solitude. Not that it would matter in this situation that much. And yep, just like that, that was game 1. So I'll see you back here for game 2. Hopefully our opponent doesn't see Captain Rangers and we can cast some spells. Alright, we're back here against, I guess, what we saw was green-white energy that we just got run down. So here for the sideboard, I cut our 3 Force Negations. I assumed they wouldn't be good here. And then I cut the Days Undoing in 1 Narset. I feel like they're a little slow and a little cute. Days Undoing's super cool when you get to do it, but not against the super aggro deck. The cards we brought in, we brought in Orum's Chant. It's not super phenomenal, but it does have a fog effect. That can give us an extra turn to possibly cast a Wrath. I did bring in 3 Consigned Memories. My idea here on that was I could counter some triggers, hopefully. Or Force Negation, I feel, is like a completely dead card. It was just kind of a switch. And then Supreme Verdict. So I'm not super excited about all of our options. Supreme Verdict is obviously phenomenal. Orum's Chant is mediocre. And Consign is also kind of mediocre. But I felt like they were better than what we had. So obviously we get to go first here since we just got a beatdown of a lifetime. First hand was pretty trash, so we had to mulligan. I feel like that's a reoccurring theme with this deck. We do have a Prismatic Ending, which is nice. A Solitude and a Memory Deluge. We can get some lands going here. We might have a chance. Second Solitude is kind of nice. Assuming we can ever get to 5 lands with no fetches and no surveils and no Lorien Revealed. We're just praying the top of the deck works for us. Luckily, we do rip a Scolding Tarn, which will let us surveil And now Memory Deluge is at least online. Our opponent isn't casting anything here. They do have 6 cards in hand, so I'm not really sure what they're doing here. It's kind of awkward. So end of turn, they cast Endurance. I thought this was kind of weird. I'm not sure what they're doing with Endurance in against us. I mean, I understand it's a flash threat, but it just felt kind of odd. Our opponent does flagstone things since they had 2. Opponent's down to 4 cards in hand. We're not under a ton of pressure, so we're going to go ahead here and consign to memory. Take another land and dress down. We draw Wrath of the Skies. And go ahead here and shock, as we obviously have a Solitude that we're going to want to play here. We're going to use our life as a resource here. We're going to take this hit. So our opponent goes a Knight of the White Orchid. They go hit their own flagstones so they can ramp here. I wanted to hold up Dress Down just in case. So we took the hit from Endurance. Now end step we're going to cast Solitude now that we didn't have to use Dress Down. You're going to see I use, like I said, use your life as a resource. So go ahead here, Meticulous Archive. We can go ahead and keep that on top since we have 6 lands in play. We can Memory Deluge with that next land. Opponent goes and attacks here. I don't want to trade off. And I apologize. I forgot White Orchid has flying, so we couldn't have traded even if we wanted to. In a turn, we'll go ahead and get our Solitude into play. Our opponent goes Ephemerate, which is pretty good. Ephemerate's one of my most favorite cards. Back when 4-color Omnath was a thing with Ephemerate and Yorion, that was peak magic for me. So here again, I want to trade off. Knight of the White Orchid does have first strike, so I'm not willing to trade my Solitude for nothing. So at this point, our opponent starts hitting our lands. I do punt here a little bit. So when they hit our land, what I should have did is just floated mana and probably went Memory Deluge. With that said, I was a little concerned that they might have something else going on. But our opponent obviously didn't. So like I said, I think that was a misplay. For some reason, I thought Knight of the White Orchid, the land entered untapped. But like I said, we definitely could have had a chance to Memory Deluge for 7 here. So go ahead here and just dress down. Our opponent has a Getic Teague. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater can't be cast. Non-creature spells with X in their mana cost can't be cast. This card's actually really good against us. Obviously, we have the 3rd Solitude, which our opponent, probably doesn't know about. It's only fair, right? Our opponent went and had Ham against us game 1. It's only fair that we have triple Solitude for this game. So we go ahead and fetch in a turn, go get our breeding pool. So we have 3 colors here. I go ahead here and just jam. I was playing the Supreme Verdict, I think. And I stand corrected. I go ahead and do the better play that I currently didn't see. So what we did there is we went Dress Down. Dress Down obviously removes the ability off of Getic Teague, saying I can't cast spells with X in the name. And then I go ahead and we cast Wrath of the Skies and exile all their permanents. Our opponent does have a Ranger Captain here. To go ahead and get Oscillate Pride. And then they also have a White Orchid. Zoom is going to hit our land this time. They do hit our breeding pool, so now we can only Prismatic Ending for 2 now. I think it's worth noting this is our last basic. Our opponent goes ahead and does the Ranger Captain of Eos things, so we can't cast any spells. With that said, we do have a bunch of Solitudes here. So our opponent is down to 3 cards in hand. They go Skyclave. That's completely fine. There's playing bodies at this point. It is worth noting I did mess up there. I should have flashed a Solitude in end of turn, which I did not do. I assume I misclicked through end of turn. We go ahead and get Kahira. We play Kahira to try and pump our Solitude. Our opponent plays another Skyclave, which does have a target this time. This time, go ahead and trade off with the Solitude. The idea being here, I'm going to untap in Supreme Verdict, and then we'll get a 3/3 back, and then we'll have Solitudes going forward. Our opponent's down to 2 cards in hand. So like I said, we go ahead here, Supreme Verdict, get a 3/3, we pass. Your opponent has another Skyclave. It's worth noting it obviously cannot target illusions. Opponent goes ahead and plays a Haywire Might. I'm not sure what that's for, to be honest. We don't really have anything that can really hit. So end of turn here, we just start flashing in Solitudes. Solitude is a hell of a card. Our opponent has an Ephemerate here, which again is whatever. It doesn't do anything here. So we untap, and then we cast Wrath of the Skies here, I do believe. I apologize. We go ahead and Solitude here. I was going to say, I thought there for a minute we were casting Wrath of the Skies, which would be terrible because we'd kill our own illusion. But at this point, I'm feeling pretty solid. I like to have a counterspell or something here, but when we see all 4 Solitudes against the all-creature deck, I can't complain too much. It is worth noting this Flooded Strand, I'm pretty sure, is out of targets. That's why we're not fetching with it. And at this point, our opponent's dead. They're just kind of wasting clock time. They have no cards in hand, and they can't block all our creatures, and they're at 3, so we just go to combat, swing. So anyway, I'll see you back here. They do a double block. It's a complete waste of time. So anyway, I'll see you back here for game 3. All right, we're back here for game 3, the final game. Same thing. Kahira is a companion. This hand looked okay to me. We have Tune a Narrative, lets us draw a card, and then we already have 3 lands. We just need to find 1 more land for Supreme Verdict to be online, and then we have Brain Surge and all types of stuff. Our opponent goes Knight of the White Orchid, hits our land. We go ahead and get a basic. I was surprised because last time, they were kind of using Knight of the White Orchid to rant themselves. Now they're kind of aggressively going after our mana base. So in a turn here, we go Tune a Narrative, find a Consign, play our land tapped. We could have played it untapped and went for Brain Surge, but I didn't think the 2 damage was worth it. I'd rather just take the 2 from the White Orchid at this point. And at this point, we get lucky. We hit a Hollowed Fountain, and we could go Supreme Verdict, but I think we can get a little bit more value out of the Supreme Verdict. We are at 16, so we have plenty of life to work with. Again, our opponent has a thing for an Endurance. I don't quite understand Endurance. I understand it's a flash threat, but it's still a little odd. So our opponent goes here, hits the Narset, and then they play. I have to look at this card. Birthing Ritual. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, look at the top 7 cards of your library, then you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, you may play the creature card with mana value X or less from among those cards on the battlefield where X is 1. So anyway, it's what do you want to call it? It's not Birthing Pod, but basically you can sack a creature to get another creature into play. As you'll see, our opponent doesn't get a whole lot of value off this card. It is terrifying, I'm sure, but it was just not phenomenal against us. So our opponent goes and sacrifices a token and gets Guided Souls. We just go ahead here and Supreme Verdict. Our opponent's down to 3 cards in hand. I'm kind of hoping this Birthing Ritual, they won't get too much value. Our opponent does go for Eternal Witness, and this Consign to Memory does come in kind of clutch. So go ahead here, counter the trigger on Eternal Witness. Our opponent has Ephemerate on Eternal Witness, which is a disgusting combo, right? It's an infinite loop. And then they go ahead and buy back their Endurance. I don't understand what the deal is with Endurance. So at this point, we go ahead and we're just going to Wrath of the Skies. That way we can clear out the Birthing Ritual and the Eternal Witness. Ephemerate has no targets, gets stuck in exile. Opponent goes Way of the Night, White Orchid again. We do float a mana this time. And then before our mana is wasted, we go ahead and Brain Surge. It is worth noting that Night of the White Orchid from now on, we are out of basics. Go ahead and Surveil. See a Spell Snare, we put that in the bin. Here comes the Endurance that we know about. Our opponent is down to 1 card in hand. It's looking pretty good for us. Just to play around another Ephemerate or something of that nature, I go ahead here and just Solitude their Endurance. I don't want us to go Solitude and them have another Ephemerate. In their upkeep, I just go ahead and Orim's Chant them. I didn't think it's getting much better here. So just to keep them from playing anything, I go ahead and dispute the Orim's Chant. So here we go ahead and add go Memory Deluge, holding up Counterspell. And we do find a Wrath of the Skies, which is nice. And now we're in a racing situation. At least we're going to try to. Our opponent goes Ephemerate on the White Orchid. As I said, we're out of basics, so we go ahead and we Counterspell that. We can't let them start popping too many lands. Opponent goes Ranger Captain. Go ahead and get an Oscillate. Which all this is great, because your Wrath of the Skies is just a heck of a card. So I'll go ahead here and add Gahira to hand. I wasn't truly worried about us losing at this point. I could have Wrath of the Skies there on that turn, but I thought we could get more value, so we're going to go ahead here and Memory Deluge. To be honest, this was kind of spewy. I should have just Wrath of the Skies last turn, because that counterspell we could have kept in hand. So this is definitely not an optimal line here. I don't think we could lose from this point. It was pretty locked up, but definitely kind of played more optimally. Our opponent goes here and sacrifices Captain, Ranger Captain. I don't know if he thought that would somehow cancel out our Wrath of the Skies that was already on the stack, but that's not how that card works. So our opponent goes Skyclave. Our Gahira never lived long, but with that said, we're going to get a 3/3 illusion back. Solitude just puts in a lot of work against these creature decks. So at this point, it's pretty much over. We have Wrath of the Skies if anything does resolve, but we also have Counterspell. Our opponent has their own Solitude. Our clock is a 2-turn clock, so I just Counterspell that. And then we just go ahead here, and I believe we Lorien Revealed. So our opponent does Flicker Wisp and is consigned to memory. We go ahead and just prevent that. Our opponent goes Ephemerate. And yeah, we get a little spewy there at the end, and we could let them have the Ephemerate and stuff. It wouldn't have been an issue, but we go ahead and hit our other Solitude. We evoke it and kill their Flicker Wisp. They have no blockers. They're at 5. So that was there was game 2. So on to the third round. All right, we're back here for round 3. Prepare yourself. I'm going to spoil it for you. Pretty sure we are up against Mono Blue Beltcher. And this game is a slog. So just prepare yourself. And as you see, our opponent is definitely on Beltcher. Unfortunately, his hand was quite awful. Not much we can do here. We're just going to get ran over for the most part, game 1. They go Thunder Trap Trainer. We have a Spell Snare. Luckily, we are hitting lands. We go ahead here and jam the Narset. We find a Tune the Narrative. We take that as we're trying to find more lands. Opponent goes Archaeologist. Finds a Lotus Bloom and some lands. They take the land. We are getting super lucky and hitting land drops here. We're just go Surveilling. Find a Wrath of the Skies off our Narset, which does nothing for us. Card's dead. I pass holding up Counterspell, as they can now, if they had a land, they could have went land and jammed Beltcher. And that's the problem we're going to run into now, right? Is like, I really want to get his Teferi resolved. However, since we don't have enough lands, I can't hold Counterspell and Teferi. So unfortunately, we get in this weird holding pattern where I'm too scared to tap out. And our opponent does have a Lotus Bloom ticking down now. And basically, I feel like if I tap out, the game's just going to end and we don't hit any lands. I do move to discard here and discard to Solitude. Hopefully we can go Memory Deluge here, end of turn, find some more lands. It's worth knowing our opponent has 5 cards in hand. I feel like the longer the game goes, unfortunately, the better it is for Beltcher. They have a lot of counterspells. So go ahead here and jam Teferi. And a Disrupting Shoal. So at this point, I have to let it go. Because again, they can just go Char Beltcher. So now our opponent has like infinite mana. Not literally, but... So here's Beltcher. I go Counterspell. They obviously have a bunch of different counterspells. They have Flare, Denial. And Beltcher comes down, activates, and that's the end of that. I take a quick look at their what they exiled here. And nothing super surprising here. Just mono blue Beltcher. So anyway, I'll see you back here for game 2. All right, we're back here for game 2 against mono blue Beltcher for round 3. As you can see here, I went ahead and cut 2 Wrath of the Skies, 2 Dress Downs, a Day's Undoing, and a Teferi, and a Supreme Verdict. These cards, Dress Down doesn't really do a whole lot. Wrath of the Skies doesn't do a whole lot. If Beltcher resolves, we're probably dying. Day's Undoing, things just a little too cute. We just want a bunch of counterspells. Teferi, kind of the same thing. I doubt we're going to have a bunch of time to get him to stick. The Supreme Verdict, again, we're probably not losing to creatures. We're losing to Beltcher. One thing I did think of, and I had to double check, but going into game 3, I think I bring Dress Down back in. So not that it's ideal, but for Dress Down, you can go Dress Down and then invoke your Solitude. And then basically on turn 2, you can have a 3-2 in play. It's not always the greatest, but this matchup can be quite abysmal for us. So if you want to turbo out a 3-2 lifelink just to get a quick clock, you, like I said, you can go Dress Down, evoke Solitude. Anyway, for the cards we brought in 4 Consign. You're going to see Consign is phenomenal. Like, that card with Replicate is pretty much unbeatable for Beltcher, I feel like. So we brought that in. We brought in Orum's Chant. Just Orum's chanting them in upkeep, or when they sack a Lotus Bloom, is great. And then we brought in 2 Mystical Disputes. Obviously, it's a blue mirror, so Mystical Disputes at a premium here. And I think that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead here and get into the game. Again, obviously we have Kahira as always. We obviously choose to go first here. First hand was pretty abysmal, so we mulligan. This hand's pretty good. We have a Surveil with a fetch for another Surveil land, Consign, Mystical Dispute, and Counterspell. The only thing we're missing here is we really need a land. Our opponent goes turn 1 tap land and does double Lotus Bloom. So, obviously we love to find a Teferi here. We could stick a Teferi and get these Lotus Blooms stuck in suspend. That would be probably the ideal situation. So we go ahead and see another counterspell. We really don't need counterspells at this point. We just need something else to do. So here, I don't think our opponent's going to do a whole lot on their turn. So I go get our Breeding Pool for our green source, and I go ahead and add Kahira to our hand. Our opponent goes Thundertrap Trainer, and they find their Beltcher, and then they do shock in a blue source. So at this point now, unfortunately, they are at the almighty 4 Dawn turn. 1 piece. 4 lands, so they can play their Beltcher. With their Lotus Blooms coming off, they can also activate Beltcher in the same turn. So I can't do anything here. Let's go fetching here. And it's pretty much going to be a game of chicken of pass go. I go ahead here and shock in, so that way we can flash into Solitude end of turn. Opponent goes War of Invention. War of Invention, obviously for 0, would get them a Lotus Bloom. They don't really, I don't know what they could use the mana for, but I go ahead and Mystical Dispute. It's probably a little bit of a waste. So here I go ahead and replicate. Replicate is phenomenal. Basically makes all the counter spells that Beltcher has worthless, as they'd have to counter all the duplicates. So here I have counterspell up. I'm considering playing the Kahira. I do play the Kahira. And then our opponent goes Flare Denial, which I'm completely fine. If they want to Flare Denial, use a Dare to counter our Kahira. Perfectly fine with that. Us playing the Kahira in the first place, I'll be honest, was a little sketchy. Probably should have passed and just held up Solitude there. That way we could have had a Force Negation and Counterspell. But I do feel like we do have to put a clock on our opponent. Otherwise, they will just amass enough counterspells with Beltcher that they will eventually win. Our opponent goes and reveals another Beltcher off this Thundertrap Trainer. We draw another Consigned Memory. At this point, I'm feeling pretty solid about our situation here. Opponent goes Archaeologist. And our opponent... What did our opponent get off the Archaeologist? I forget. Our opponent goes and gets a land off the Archaeologist. So end of turn, I'm going to go ahead here and flash in Solitude. Exile the creature that has a power. And now at this point, I feel pretty solid. Our opponent has 5 cards in hand. We have 5 cards in hand. And Consign pretty much means that they can't punk us out of nowhere. And we do have a clock in play. So our opponent goes for Beltcher here. And then I just go all in on Replicate. I don't think there's any way they could have countered out a 1 for like 3. But I wasn't going to mess around and find out. So I just Replicate for the maximum number of 4. Obviously our opponent can't pay. And they pass back. So far they're down 2 Belchers. And I'm feeling pretty good. We had double counter spell and a Force Negation up with us pitching a Brain Surge. And if they don't do anything, we can Brain Surge end a turn and hopefully find more counter spells. So instead of doing that, I decide here we have enough counter spells in hand. Our opponent is at 6. If we put a Solitude into play, that makes it a 2-turn clock. So now our opponent's dead next turn, and they have to get through double counter spell with Force Negation backup, which maybe is possible with 6 cards, but highly unlikely. So we managed to get that one. So now we're going to go be on the draw, and I'll show you the sideboarding for that next round. All right, here we are for round 3, game 3. We got to go up here against Blue Beltcher, hopefully get there. It is worth noting, like I talked about earlier, I did come back and I cut 2 Prismatic Endings for this game, and I put 2 Dress Downs in. Dress Downs, again, a little weird interaction, but like I said, if push came to shove, you could go Dress Down, evoke a Solitude, get a 3-2 into play, and just try and do a beatdown plan. So anyway, what I cut for that was 2 Prismatic Endings, which is questionable, right? Because they have Prismatic Ending easily answers their Lotus Blooms if they let them sit on the table. But I think we just need a clock. So that was the only change to the sideboard. So let's go ahead here and get into the games. Hopefully we can get a hand we can keep. Of course, we had the mulligan yet again. I think we've mulliganed pretty much every time. Hand isn't terrible. We have 2 lands, Counterspell, Force Negation, Lorien Revealed, and a Teferi. So we're guaranteed to hit 3 lands thanks to the Lorien Revealed, and we have a 2 Surveils here. Opponent goes Thundertrap Trainer and gets a Jawari Disruption, which is a land that enters tapped, or I think it's for 2. Your opponent can Force Spike one of your cards, meaning that they can make you pay 1 more. I was a little scared about playing our Teferi next turn because of the Jawari Disruption, but they go ahead here and play it as land. Since they play it as a land and we have Force Negation backup on their turn, if our Teferi gets countered, you're going to see us just jam Teferi here. Oh, I lied to you. Apparently we decided not to jam Teferi. I apologize. I think maybe we were waiting for 1 more land maybe to try and hold up Mystical Dispute when we go to Teferi. I think the issue there is I was afraid we played Teferi. They had 2 Thunder Trap trainers in play, and they could start attacking down at Teferi. And we had no good way to answer the Thunder Trap trainers. Obviously, we have Supreme Verdict, but we don't want to be tapping out. And we don't have a 4th land. Still a questionable spot, though. It's hard to say, right? I think I maybe should have just shoved the Teferi there and just hoped to hit a land and we could have casted it. Supreme Verdict at instant speed off of our Teferi. Anyway, we go ahead here and Lorien Revealed. We get our island. And I think we just pass and hold up Memory Deluge now that we drew a Memory Deluge. Again, our life is a resource. We're not going to die to the 1/2s. We're going to die to Beltcher. And in turn, our opponent goes War of Invention, trying to get a Lotus Bloom. We respond with Mystical Dispute. Our opponent goes and tries to Disrupting Shoal. We go ahead and counterspell, and they go ahead and Flare Denial. So here they could tentatively shove. If they had a Beltcher, they could go for Beltcher here. It is worth noting we obviously have Force Negation up. It doesn't look like our opponent has a Beltcher here, thank goodness. So here I go ahead and try and jam Teferi. Our opponent has Sink into Stupor and puts it back into our hand. And our opponent goes for Seagate Restoration. Yeah, so we go ahead and have to force that. I didn't want them drawing 2 cards and have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So we go ahead here, we jam the Teferi, we plus the Teferi. It is worth noting here, if they had drawn Beltcher, they could have played Beltcher, and we would have been okay for a turn because Teferi could have bounced it, but we're not in a super great spot. Luckily, our opponent doesn't seem to have much here, and we can Memory Deluge end of turn. We really need a counterspell and a land, which we find both. So now we just keep plussing this Teferi. I apologize. We sent a Thunder Trap Trainer back to their hand with Teferi, as we could counter it on the way down, and I wanted to make sure our Narset could get its value. At this point, we find a Kassan, we have a Teferi in play, and this game's completely wrapped up. So I do a Harbinger of the Seas here. We don't care. Like, we have everything we could want here. And at this point, it's just pretty much autopilot. Go ahead and get our Kahira. They just keep holding up Replicate. It doesn't matter at this point. We have Teferi. Teferi just means all our opponent's counterspells don't work anymore. And the game is over. We go ahead and just counter here, as they couldn't get a Beltcher onto the table and activate it. And we just don't want any creatures in play. We just want to end this game as quick as possible. We activate our Hall of the Storm Giants and swing for lethal. So anyway, that was a real slog there. Pretty terrifying. A couple spots where we could have lost. But Mono Blue Beltcher is stressful to play against. So anyway, I'll see you back here for round 4. Like I said, the next 2 rounds are losses. And you're really going to see the power of Flage against our deck. Alright, here we are for round 4, game 1. We do win this die roll, and we actually have a keepable hand, which is shocking. We haven't had many of those today. It is worth noting our mana is a little questionable, but Pluid Delta into a Surveil with a Lorien Revealed, I felt like our mana would be okay. And we go ahead here, and we do find another land. Looks like they have an Oscillate Pride over there. Looks like maybe we're up against Energy. It is nice that we do have a Wrath of the Skies here. Opponent doesn't seem to want to play too much. I don't know if they don't have, if they don't have anything. or if they just don't want to commit too much to the board. We see a prismatic ending on top. We go ahead and keep that, so that way you can prismatic ending the Ocelot Pride. That way, hopefully, we're incentivizing our opponent to play more things into the board. Our opponent has, what's this card called? Failure? No, this card is terrible. Flashed in, end of turn. Again, our opponent's playing smart here. They don't want to commit a bunch of things to the board. They just want to beat us down with as little as possible, so that way, if we do wrath them, they're not completely screwed. So it's playing pass go here. Idea is I'm going to brain surge here end of turn and also hold up spell snare. Our life is a resource. So that's a perfect spell snare target for us. And then end of turn here, we go ahead and brain surge. Force Negation is a terrible card in this matchup. So at this point now, we can hold up Solitude to flash in end of turn. Our opponent goes Charm at the end of our turn and exiles our graveyard. And our opponent goes Fable the Mirror Breaker. We go ahead here and Force Negation it, pitching a blue card so we can still go end of turn Solitude. We are down to 8, and we don't want to go too low. Life is a resource, but you still got to manage your life total. So at this point, we go ahead and add Kahira to hand. We play Kahira just to get our Solitude extra +1 in Vigilance. And we start attacking here. Our opponent's down to 1 card in hand. And it is a Blood Moon, which is a fairly big doozy against us. So obviously I can't go ahead here and swing the Kahira, and then our opponent gets Flage, and this is where it all goes downhill from us. So at this point, we're pretty much locked out the game due to Blood Moon. But as you'll see, the next 2 matches, Flages just destroys us. And our opponent manages to find back-to-back Flages here to clear a board, which is disgusting. They had, mind you, they had 1 card in hand. So drawing back-to-back Flages, I think, was probably the best thing they could have drawn. And at this point, we just kind of get ran over. So we had to go Days Undoing here, which doesn't feel good because our opponent was at 1 card in hand. But we needed something here, so. Like I said, I don't think there's much we could do. But basically, to get out of this, we needed to hit our other planes and then have a Wrath of the Skies. And unfortunately, we don't manage to get there. We do Prismatic Ending to Blood Moon, and then we can Wrath Disguise our board away. But our opponent still has 5 cards in hand. And then I don't know why our opponent plays the Guide of Souls. I guess it's just to troll us. Because there's nothing we can do here when we're tapped out to prevent this Flage. I guess technically we could have had a the blue Invoke Elemental, but still highly unlikely. So anyway, like I said, our opponent hitting Flages is what killed us that game. So anyway, I'll see you back here for game 2. All right, here we are for game 2. We're up against Energy. So sideboard wise, I cut a Brain Surge, 2 counter spells, 2 Narsets, and a Days Undoing. A Days Undoing is just too cute. Narset lets us find stuff, but it's a little slow. Counter spells are good, but I feel at the same time they're playing enough stuff that there's holding up 2 mana every turn isn't always super likely. And then Brain Surge was also cut. It helps us find stuff, but 3 mana, draw 4 when you're getting run down isn't ideal. So we brought in 2 Rest in Peace to hopefully fight against Flage. We brought in the Supreme Verdict because we want as many wraths as we can. We brought in 2 Celestial Purges, helps us answer Blood Moon if it resolves. And then we brought in 1 Orange Chant as it can stop them from casting stuff and act like a fog. So anyway, we will be on the play here. And we actually have a keepable hand for once. So we have a Archive and a double fetch land with a Lorien Reveal, a Solitude, a Celestial Purge, and a Spell Snare. It's like probably the best hand. One of the best hands we could get. Obviously, we would like a Wrath, but it's a pretty decent hand. And we didn't have to mulligan to 6 like we have every game so far. So on the turn here, I don't get an Archive. I go ahead and get a Plains. I want to make sure we have a Plains so they cast Blood Moon. We can go Celestial Purge. Our opponent tries to end step Flash in their Thalia. I don't know why I mispronounce this. And we Spell Snare it. Unfortunately, we do get punished a little bit here as our opponent has a Johnny, which we probably would have rather countered more. And the turn, I go ahead here and get an island. And then we get the island, obviously, to play around Blood Moon. And then we island cycle to go get our Archive. We see a Prismatic Ending. I didn't think we really needed it since we had the Wrath of the Skies. In hindsight, though, I should have kept that Prismatic Ending as it would have answered our Johnny. Wrath of the Skies does not answer Planeswalkers. So if they are able to flip that Johnny, we would have had some problems. Unfortunately, we're starting to stall out here on lands. Our opponent does not have a problem with lands. Again, our life total is a resource, so I'm not going to go ahead and do a whole lot here. So at this point, I go ahead here and cash in the Wrath of the Skies. Our opponent goes ahead here and tries to flip their Johnny by bolting their own bolting their own token so they could flip a Johnny with Wrath of the Sky still on the stack. I obviously don't want them to flip the Johnny because we have no way to answer it and it would get out of control. We probably should have kept this Prismatic Ending from earlier. So I felt forced to go Solitude, answer their Johnny. Then obviously the Wrath of the Sky is resolved and X equaled 0. So anyway, now we're going to pass. We're not in a super great spot, but the board's clear. And we still have a counter spell up, Dress Down, Celestial Purge, and 1 land away from a Solitude if we ever find it. So that's where we're at now. Our opponent is using an Elegant Parlor to surveil here, and they put an Aether Hub into the trash. Our opponent finds God of Souls, which isn't that terrifying all by itself. They don't have any energy currently. We do find a Memory Deluge. We're obviously going to go ahead here and take this hit so we can Memory Deluge end a turn here. It is worth noting our opponent is flooding pretty badly over there. They do have 2 Arena Glories, which is worth noting. So if they ever do find a Flage, they can really get us. So here I want to start trying to turn the corner. We have Counterspell up and Solitude. So the idea here is I want a Solitude end the turn. Again, these beats for 1. We're not going to die to a 1-2 currently. So in the turn, we obviously go to Solitude. This time I end up hanging the Pride. I just don't want them to start making tokens. So at some point here, I probably should have played the Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace would just stop the Flage. Because at this point, they have enough mana they could go Flage and then Arena Glory back and haste a Flage. So that is not obviously not ideal. So I should have cast the Rest in Peace at some point. So at this point, I go ahead here, cash in our Wrath of the Skies, gets our Solitude back. Opponent has another Static Prison. We managed to find a Teferi. We can resolve that next turn. Hopefully that'll start getting a clock going and we'll be okay. I'm still shocked that I didn't play this Rest in Peace. I think the reason I did, obviously, is we have a Memory Deluge in the yard, but I don't think the risk of dying to Flage is worth it. So anyway, player Teferi. We activate Teferi. Our opponent goes Galvanic Discharge on it. And our opponent gives a Ragavan Rush. Or Haste, I'm sorry. Go ahead and counterspell. I just don't want them getting any good cards off the top of our deck. So yet again, I am playing with fire. I'm at 12. As I keep saying, Arena of Glory would be terrible. So then our opponent goes Orm's Chant, so we can't counter anything. It is worth knowing I did punt here. So our opponent went Orm's Chant. What I should have did was fetched in response and Memory Deluged Flashback. That's what I was planning on doing with that turn, but I didn't respond to the Orm's Chant, so that was definitely a mistake on my part. So at this point, our opponent is out of energy, so we're getting our Solitude back. We get to exile their Pyromancer. And then we get to go Deluge here end of turn. And we find another Solitude and Counterspell. So at this point, we should jam the Rest in Peace. Hopefully we do. And it looks like I don't jam it. I am just shocked. I mean, we are technically out of Flage range at this point, but I was definitely playing with fire here. So we go ahead here and dress down when the Ajani comes in, just to prevent them from getting any more creatures, as their creatures are starting to get a little wide. And then, like a complete and utter boss, we rip Wrath of the Skies to clear their entire board. They have one card in hand, and it's pretty much locked up at this point between the Counterspell, Solitude, Celestial Purge. We have it all at this point, so this is completely locked up. Our opponent's just trying to run some time down here. Opponent goes Flash, we Counterspell just so we have lethal. So anyway, I'll see you back here for game 3. All right, back here for round 4, game 3 against Boros Energy. Didn't change anything about the sideboard. We go ahead and keep this hand. This hand is pretty suspicious, but we had an archive with a Flood Strand for another archive, and we had the plains for any Blood Moon. It is painful here. Pardon me. It didn't end up coming up, but like I said, we're very threat light, and the Surveil, I ended up seeing all the Storm Giants. I hate putting this in a graveyard. Obviously, we like to keep this as it's a very important threat to us. Unfortunately, though, with me already having 4 lands in hand and only 1 piece of interaction in Prismatic Ending, there's no way we could keep all the Storm Giants. So I did have to bin it here. It didn't feel great, though. But it has Johnny, which is not great for us. I fetch here, get our island. We Prismatic Ending via Johnny. We obviously don't want it flipping. We also want an island for future Prismatic Endings. And of course, our opponent has Blood Moon, which is rough. But we set ourselves up, right? We had 3 Prismatic Endings, 2 Celestial Purges, and a Teferi. So we have numerous outs here. On top of that as well, we also have 4 Wrath of the Skies that would also answer this problem for us. I'll let you know a secret. We don't hit it and we die. It's really unfortunate. So anyway, nothing to see here. Ragavan's doing Ragavan things. It does hit a Teferi Hero Dominaria. I go ahead and buy our Kahira here. Kahira is castable. Fortunately, we're just getting beat down here. Ragavans is exiling more lands for us. And this is the most exhilarating game you'll ever see. I thought I did okay with us having double planes in hand, fetching the snow-covered island. But if you don't see one of your 8 outs, I guess it is what it is. So go ahead here and play a Kahira. Don't expect it to live very long. Our opponent plays a spell. We can actually spell snare. We got some use of our spell snare. Opponent dashes the Ragavan again. Unfortunately, our opponent is now up to 3 energy. And they also have a static prison, which is extra salt in the wound for us. And now they use God of Souls to activate its ability. And we're at 1, and we have no outs. And then our opponent for the extra Rubbins has Orum's Chance, so we can't do anything. So anyway, this matchup, when they had what they had, it felt awful. So yeah, I think what made this matchup so bad here, obviously the Blood Moon was rough for us and us not hitting our outs. But what really hurt too was also, sorry, before I end there, we totally had a small window there, where that tuned the narrative. We could have hit a Solitude, and we didn't hit a Solitude. But Flage in energy, let me tell you, it is super strong. Flage in energy, I think, is it another dimension of attack, if that makes sense. With that said, this game felt really tilting for the fact that we had two celestial purges, 3 prismatic endings. We had 4 solitudes. We had 4 Wrath of the Skies, and a Teferi Time Rifler to get out of it. So we had like 13 or 14 hits. And we set ourselves up the best we could, and we just didn't see any of it. So unfortunately, that's how Magic goes, and I'll see you back here for the 5th and final round. All right, here we are for round 5. If you think that last game we played was not the best, where we lost the Blood Moon twice, this one, I'm pretty sure we get rolled even worse. And I'm pretty sure, I don't remember this deck. I know it runs Flage. I'm pretty sure. So anyway, we have a semi-keepable hand here. We have Fledge Strand Island, Tune a Narrative to draw more cards, an Archive to surveil to find a land, and in an island. So assuming we can keep finding lands here, pardon me, I think we are in a good spot. Like I said, I know our opponent's on a creature strategy, but I don't recall the exact deck they're on. Thundering Falls. I'm reliving this with you on this one. I don't remember this deck. Thundering Falls makes me think it's almost like Splinter Twin or something. Our opponent keeps a card on top. Then they go Elegant Parlor. And they also keep another card on top. Probably not great for us. So in a turn here, we go Tune a Narrative. And then I don't want to risk it with another Tune a Narrative. I just go ahead and Island cycle, go get a Archive. We surveil. See, it's a fairy that we can't cast for a very long time, so we pitch it. Oh, that's right. This opponent's on Jeskai. This matchup is awful. I almost don't want to commentate it, to be completely honest with you. So our opponent's on Jeskai. They have Flage, but they play a land. Hopefully, I think it's this game they play it. They have a land where they can search historic spells. And they run multiple Teferis, and obviously Flage is, I guess, historic. And they can tutor their deck. It is wild. So our opponent tries to do the cutesy thing with this drifter with a dress down, so they would basically get to keep the 4/4, draw 2 cards, so they replace themselves. I counterspell it. I go to Fairy. They go Force Negation. Our opponent has the Arena of Glory, and they have the Flage. We get got by Flage a lot. At one point here, I thought we exiled all the Flages, but no, it's multiple Flages and multiple 3 calls to Fairies. This is the land. All right, I gotta stop this here. So we single-handedly lose to this. Monument Henge. It's for 2 and 2 white. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom in any order. Yeah, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So if you don't see where this is going, Teferi, which is Time Reveler, which is phenomenal against us, is legendary. And Flage is legendary. And as you can guess, them getting a Flage every turn or Teferi, now mind you, they miss periodically here, but it's almost unwinnable. Like, it is abysmal. So anyway, I'll go ahead here and we'll play it, but this match takes forever, and it's never really super close. Like, it's close enough that I obviously don't concede immediately, but it is rough. So end of turn here, I try and flash into Solitude to try and get some pressure going. Our opponent's was down to 3 cards in hand, and they have a Galvanic Discharge. Super unfortunate. I knew we had to get a clock going as soon as they played this that land, as they're just gonna completely outvalue us. Yes, their deck, I'm not sure how it would do against very aggressive decks. I assume it has Wrath of the Skies or something in there, but I don't know how they fit everything they fit in there against aggro. Like, I feel like their deck's doing super cool things, but at the same time, like, there can't be enough room for everything. So I'd be curious. So our opponent activates their land there, and they find a Flage. Our opponent's at 3 cards, they just pass. I'm pretty sure they literally just keep activating their land to keep getting value. Which makes sense. This time they find a Teferi Time Raveler. So I jam the Teferi. I obviously have to counter this, otherwise all my counter spells are off. So we have a small fight back and forth here with counter spells flying. We do manage to answer Teferi, but it's at what cost, right? Like, they're just going to be able to tutor another one. So at this point, they finally decide to go in on the Flage. So they use Arena of Glory, go in on the Flage. And then I obviously go ahead here in Solitude. And of course, they have a Subtlety, of all things. Like I said, this list is very wild. So I don't want to take a hit for 9 from Flage, because then I just die to the Subtlety next turn. So I have to evoke another Solitude. So we obviously draw Solitude. And I go ahead and grab Kiora here. Grab Kiora here as it is a pitch to Solitude if needed. And our opponent naturally rips another Flage off the top to put us to 6. Opponent swings at us for 3. I have to answer here because they can just cast their other Flage that's in the yard that they just cast. And they have their own Solitude. So at this point, we're in desperation mode. We have to cast Days Undoing just to get their Flage out of their yard, reset the graveyards, and keep going here. Go ahead there and invoke a Solitude to answer their Solitude. I was at 9. I was just getting a little concerned. Not saying that was definitely the play, but we had double counterspell into Fairy. So I feel like if we can just stay alive, hopefully we could stabilize was the plan here. So here I go to Fairy with Counterspell backup. Ideally it would resolve, we'll plus, and this is where I punt. So huge misplay here. If you missed what happened, obviously the timing on Planeswalkers is when you play it, there's no priority passing until you either move phases or activate the Planeswalker. And I accidentally moved phases. I wanted to obviously plus Teferi, and then obviously they still could have Galvanic discharged it at that point and killed it. But I at least would have got the card down and untapped 2 lands. Unfortunately, this is a huge blunder and one we do not recover from. I don't think we were winning regardless, as our opponent has 5 cards in hand, and they still have this this henge in play that they were going to be able to keep searching all their Phlages and Teferis that we should put back in their deck. But definitely a misplay on my part. Yeah, so at this point our opponent has so much mana that they can just like search for Phlage, go Phlage. So they can do Dress Down into Phlage here. Opponent still has 5 cards in hand. So obviously we go ahead and go Prismatic Ending on their Phlage here. So I go Prismatic on their Phlage, and I do mess up here. I thought we were stabilizing for the simple fact that I thought we had exiled all 4 of their Phlages for some reason, which is not the case. When I looked over here, I thought we had exiled all their Phlages. But one of them is actually a Teferi. That was on me. I was trying to keep the pace of the game going, as I didn't want to time out in a control match like this. Definitely need to keep the pacing going. So we play an R set. We find a Memory Deluge, and this is where I punt again. This is punt city. So I see a Memory Deluge, and for some reason, I swear I clicked the Memory Deluge, and for some reason, Moto does not add it to hand. I'll take the L on that one and assume that it was my fault, but I definitely should have Memory Deluge. So between these two things, I deserve to lose this one. But yeah. That was, at this point, I'm already starting to tilt after the misclick with the Teferi, the move through phases, and then not getting that Memory Deluge was terrible. As you'll see here, though, I'm pretty sure they find another Phlage, and it was all irrelevant anyway. But our opponent's also at 32 life, and we're swinging for 3, so our opponent has plenty of time. It is also worth noting that our opponent is down to 25 cards in deck, and we're still at 37. Opponent goes Wrath of the Skies for 5. At this point, we don't got much going on, so I'm just activating Hall of the Storm Giants. This is not a winning line, but we had to do what we can do. Opponent finds a Teferi, which is pretty much the end for us because we can't counter it. And once it resolves, all our counter spells are off for the rest of the game. Our opponent does whiff on their hedge search this time. We draw our Kahira that we had shuffled back in with our Days Undoing. So we go ahead here and attempt to cast it. And then our opponent hits the 4th Phlage, which is a game at this point, as they'll buy it back here and nug us for whatever it is, 9, I guess. So, like I said, I thought all the Phlages were gone in exile, but I messed that up. There's many mess ups in this game here. Definitely one of the worst games I've ever played. So, anyway, I'll see you back here for game 2. All right. Here we are for game number 2 against this abomination of Jeskai that is just going to wreck us. So looking at sideboard here, I cut all 4 Wrath of the Skies. Wrath of the Skies isn't bad, but at the same time, they're only playing Phlages, which Wrath of the Sky does answer, but I'd rather it's not the preferred way to answer it. I cut both Dress Downs. Dress Down isn't super great. Like, yes, I can answer Flage, but then Flage sticks around, right? So that's not ideal either. So in its place, I brought in 2 Mystical Disputes and 2 Rest in Peace. Unfortunately, as you're going to see, I don't think we ever see the Rest in Peace, and we just get ran over. But let's go ahead and get into this horrific game. Mulligan to 6, as always. This deck just always mulligans. So we have Spell Snare, Counterspell, and Teferi. Spell Snare is a little questionable, right? Like, it hits their counter spells, but that's about all it hits. So it's only good in a counter war fight. But if you don't have another counter spell to even start the counter war fight, Spell Snare is not that great. As you saw, we surveilled, and we had to put our Days Undoing into the trash. Just looking for other things. I didn't think we had time to keep it. Obviously, it'd be super cute to set up with Narset, but I didn't think that was happening here. So, generic control here, you know, it's pass back and forth. Whoever has to move first probably loses. I assume our opponent was digging for something here. They go Elegant Parlor, Surveil, and then Dress Down, cycling a Dress Down. And then, oh, that's right. And they do it end of turn so you can go for the Drifter, which is kind of cute, right? You can go Dress Down, end of turn, draw a card, and then go Drifter in your main phase and not have to spend as much mana. Our opponent then proceeds to Surgical Extraction our counter spells on our upkeep, which I thought was pretty wild. But then we go to Teferi and they force a negation. So our opponent's down to 4 cards at this point. I don't think it's over yet at this point, but it's not feeling good. And then our opponent has their own Teferi. And at that point, the game's kind of closing. It's funny, normally Surgical is a terrible card, right? Like, it's card disadvantage and things of that nature. And then anyway, we go Prismatic Ending on Teferi. They have Counterspell. Obviously, Spell Snare's no good here because of Teferi. And then on top of all the things, our opponent is at 2 cards in hand. And they rip the Henge. So it's not bad enough that they already have the Teferi in play. They now have the Henge where they can search every turn. So we go Prismatic Ending again on Teferi. But at this point, the game has ended because they have Henge. So I don't know how many of this are playing, or they just naturally drew into it in both games and, you know, luck sacked the crap out of us or not. But so I'll go ahead here and add Kikira to hand. Our opponent goes Dress Down yet again. I go ahead and just play our Kikira here. I had to hope for a miracle here that they somehow managed don't find a Flage with them with their Henge, and they don't have a removal spell, and that Kikira can go to distance. But spoiler alert here. Doesn't happen. So they go Henge again, and they do miss again. I gotta give them that is 10 cards that they have missed. So that's something. But 5 is not 0. And like I said, I deserve to lose game 1 for sure. So we go ahead here and we jam Teferi. And our opponent goes Subtlety. And Subtlety is pretty good because it's a blocker and it puts our Teferi back. We go ahead and put Teferi on top. And our opponent finally finds a Flage. And then they also miraculously have an Arena of Glory. So the game has officially ended. Our opponent has one card in hand, but that is super irrelevant. So go ahead here and go to Fairy. We need to plus and find Rest in Peace, but instead we find a Narset. And that is all they wrote. So. And here comes... surprised they didn't bring Flage back that turn. I don't know what they were doing here. I guess they didn't want to Arena Glory it. A little shocked by that, to be honest. And of course, as always, Rest in Peace shows up the turn after we need it. And our opponent has their own Spell Snare. So this game has pretty much ended. Rest in Peace shows up a turn too late. And then Spell Snare on it pretty much takes care of that. So here comes back a Hasty Flage. And just like that, the Life Toes have completely flip-flopped. And we take a draw, and we do not hit a... We don't hit a Prismatic Ending or a... or a Solitude. And of course, we mill over to Solitude with the Narset, and terrible. We play another Narset here. There's no targets. And they had a counterspell anyway, but yeah, super rough. So anyway, that completes this. Final wrap up here on Blue-White Control. I really like Blue-White Control. I think it really depends on what you think the matchups are. This matchup here was completely abysmal. Game 1 was definitely my punt. This is where I was saying Rest in Peace didn't feel as solid. I always think like our opponent had there was Surgical. I'm not saying Surgical is the answer for everything, and I don't think it should be your only graveyard hate unless you're a super aggro deck or it fits your narrative in your deck. But I think we had Surgical here. We definitely would have had a better fight, but this Henge here really put in work against us. So anyway, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Sorry this video took so long. I recorded this like 6 days ago, but these commentaries over top take a little bit. So anyway, hopefully coming up next, I'll have another... I tend to play blue. You'll find out I just play blue, some type of control. Maybe we'll try Splinter Twin or something. Splinter Twin's not doing too hot, but maybe we'll play that next. So thanks for tuning in.